Human sees his shadow move alone, and the alien girl says one of the echoes isn't hers at all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. John Matthews was just another ordinary guy, or so he thought. A few blocks from his apartment in New York, under the warm glow of streetlights, he walked through the park as usual. But tonight was different. As he strolled along the path, he noticed something strange. His shadow was moving on its own. It wasn't a trick of the light, and it wasn't the way shadows tend to stretch or shrink with the angle of the sun. No, this shadow was distinct. It was moving, independent of his every step, twitching and twisting in ways that his own body did not. At first, John thought he was just imagining it. Maybe he was tired, or his mind was playing tricks. But as he stopped and watched in disbelief, the shadow continued its dance. It shifted away from him, its shape darkening against the concrete. It almost seemed to have a life of its own, something unnatural, something wrong. John's heart started to race. He quickly turned to leave, but every time he moved, the shadow moved too. Except, it didn't mimic his exact movements. It did things he didn't do. As he stood frozen, unsure whether to run or stay, a voice from behind him called out, sharp and clear. "It's not yours, you know." He spun around, and there she was, standing in the park like she'd appeared out of nowhere. A young woman with striking features. Her skin was pale blue, her hair silver, her eyes glowing like amber. She was the last thing he expected to see, and yet there she was, looking at him as though this were all completely normal. She didn't look like someone from Earth. Who are you?" John stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elira," she replied simply, her voice calm, like this kind of thing happened every day. "And that shadow is not yours. But it's important." "What do you mean?" John asked, his mind racing to understand what was happening. "That shadow," Elira explained, "it's not a shadow in the usual sense. It's an echo of something that shouldn't be here." John felt a chill run through him as he tried to make sense of what she said. An echo? He glanced at the shadow, still moving behind him, twisting and stretching, but somehow not quite his own. It seemed as if it was trying to communicate with him. Elira's eyes narrowed. "And one of those echoes isn't mine at all," she added cryptically. Her words hung in the air like a puzzle, one that John couldn't begin to solve. But something told him this was just the beginning. John stood frozen, staring at the shadow as it shifted on its own, its movements impossible to ignore. Elira's words echoed in his mind. That shadow is an echo. He couldn't understand what she meant. How could a shadow be an echo? He had seen shadows move before, but nothing like this. Nothing that moved with a mind of its own. Elira's presence only added to the strangeness. She wasn't from around here. He could feel that. Her appearance alone told him that. But there was more. There was something about her calm demeanor, the way she seemed to know exactly what was happening, that unnerved him. "What do you mean by echo?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elira looked at him, her amber eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "Echoes are remnants. Fragments of something that doesn't belong in this world. They come from elsewhere," she explained, her tone matter of fact. John tried to process this. "Elsewhere? You mean another world?" "Yes," she replied, nodding slightly. "But not exactly another world. It's more like a space between spaces, a place where things that don't belong get caught." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "That shadow isn't yours, John. It's a fragment of something that slipped through. And one of those echoes, it's not mine. Not at all." He blinked, confusion deepening. "What do you mean it's not yours? How do you know it's not yours?" Elira tilted her head, her gaze shifting to the shadow behind him, still moving, still twisting in ways it shouldn't. "Because I can. Feel it. It doesn't belong to me, or to this world. It's different." John glanced nervously at the shadow again, the way it seemed to react to their conversation, almost as if it understood. The more he stared, the more it seemed to shift, as though the darkness itself was alive. Elira stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's something you need to understand, John. This shadow, it's not just a trick of the light. It's something more. It's a piece of a larger puzzle, one that we both need to solve. John swallowed hard. A puzzle? What does that mean? It means that the shadow is a clue, a part of something far bigger than either of us. And if we don't figure it out soon, the echoes will keep growing. Alira's eyes darkened slightly as she spoke, the weight of her words sinking in. The air between them seemed to grow colder. John could feel the tension, the uncertainty of what was happening. How do we stop it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alira's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. I'm not sure, but we need to find out what's causing these echoes, or they'll keep coming, and they won't stop with the shadow. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. John looked at the shadow once more. It was still there, still moving, still as unnerving as before. And somewhere deep down, he knew Alira was right. The shadow was just the beginning. He had no idea what he had stumbled into, but he couldn't turn back now. He had to figure this out. For his own sake, and for the world around him. John could feel his pulse quickening as Alira's words sank in. He glanced at the shadow again, still twitching on the ground like a living thing, its movements sharp and deliberate. The darkness seemed to respond to the conversation, almost as if it were aware of them. Alira's presence felt heavy, like an unspoken truth waiting to be revealed. John's mind raced. What did she mean by echoes? And why was one of them not hers? He needed answers, but something told him that asking too many questions might lead to even more confusion. How do we even begin to figure this out? He finally asked, his voice steady but uncertain. Alira's eyes softened as she looked at him. We start by understanding what we're dealing with. You've already seen the shadow, but there's more to it than that. She paused, scanning the park around them as if looking for something hidden in the shadows. These echoes come from a place that doesn't belong to this world. They slip through cracks in space and time, fragments of something larger, something beyond our understanding. John tried to wrap his mind around her words. You're saying that these echoes are like pieces of another world? Exactly, Alira replied, her gaze never leaving the moving shadow. They're fragments of something that shouldn't exist here, things that have crossed over from somewhere else. And they leave a mark, an echo. That shadow, it's a piece of something that came through. John swallowed hard, the weight of her explanation pressing down on him. It was hard to grasp, but there was something in the way Alira spoke that made him believe her. So what's next? He asked. Alira's expression became more serious. Next, we need to find out where the echoes are coming from. These things, these fragments, don't just appear out of nowhere. Someone or something is causing them to slip through. She paused, her eyes narrowing as if she were calculating something. And it's not just the shadow. There are more of these echoes, and they'll keep coming unless we figure out how to stop them. John felt a chill run down his spine. How do we stop them? Do we have any idea what's causing this? Alira shook her head. Not yet, but we can't just sit here and wait for more to appear. We need to find the source before it's too late. John looked at her, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had no idea what kind of world he was stepping into, but there was no turning back now. He had to trust Alira, even if her story sounded unbelievable. The more he looked at the shadow, the more he felt it pulling him in, drawing him into something much bigger than himself. All right, he said, his voice steady now. Let's find out where these echoes are coming from. Alira gave him a small, reassuring nod. Good. Stay close. We're going to need all the help we can get. With that, she turned and started walking, her pace quick but measured. John hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the park one last time before following her. As he moved to catch up, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much darker. The echoes were just starting to surface, and he had no idea what kind of forces they were about to face. John walked closely behind Alira, his mind racing with the questions that had been spinning in his head since their encounter. The park seemed different now, quieter, almost too still, as if the world was holding its breath. He glanced around, trying to make sense of the situation, but everything felt out of place. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting long, eerie shadows. As they walked, the strange sensation of being watched crept up on him, a feeling that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Where are we going? He finally asked, breaking the silence. Alira didn't answer right away. She kept walking, her steps quick and purposeful. It was as if she already knew where they were heading, as though she had been here before. To find the source of the echoes, she replied after a moment, her voice steady. We need to understand where they're coming from. John nodded, though he still didn't fully understand. The idea of echoes from another world felt surreal, but there was something undeniable in the way Alira spoke. Her confidence gave him a strange sense of security. And how do we find it? He asked, his voice carrying the edge of uncertainty. Alira stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her amber eyes locked with his, and for a moment, it felt like she was looking right through him. We follow the shadows, she said simply. John frowned. The shadows. Yes, she said, her gaze softening. They are the key. The echoes are attracted to darkness. Wherever the shadow leads us, that's where we'll find the answers. The words didn't make sense to John at first, but as he looked back at the shadow that had been following him, he began to see what she meant. The shadow was moving again, but this time it wasn't just following him. It was shifting, stretching in a way that felt like it was beckoning them forward. Without another word, Alira started walking again, her pace steady and unwavering. John hesitated for a moment, watching the shadow twitch as if it had a mind of its own. But then he took a deep breath and followed her. They made their way through the streets, past the quiet buildings and empty sidewalks, moving deeper into the heart of the city. As they walked, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease that had been lingering since the shadow first moved began to intensify. It was as if the very fabric of reality was shifting around them, warping just slightly, in a way that John couldn't quite explain. The shadows grew longer as they moved, stretching farther than they should have, moving in ways that didn't follow the rules of light. John glanced up at the buildings around them, half expecting to see strange ripples in the air, like the world was warping in front of his eyes. But there was nothing, just the cold, silent night. Alira didn't seem to notice. She was focused entirely on the shadow, watching it closely as it twisted and turned, guiding them forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the city, where the streets faded into a dense forest. The shadow had led them here. John felt his heart race again as he looked into the dark trees ahead. Alira stopped and turned to face him, her expression serious. This is it, she said softly. Whatever is causing the echoes, it's here. John felt a chill run down his spine as the shadows around them seemed to deepen, pulling him into the darkness. He had no idea what they would find in the forest, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. The forest was unnervingly quiet. The usual sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, seemed miles away now, replaced by the thick silence of the trees. John felt the weight of the darkness press in on him as he stepped into the clearing, Alira walking ahead with a determined stride. The shadow moved with them, a constant presence that was both familiar and disconcerting. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It felt more like a guide, pulling them deeper into the woods. John glanced at Alira, her pale blue skin almost glowing in the dim light, her eyes scanning the area with a sharpness that seemed out of place in the stillness of the night. She was waiting for something, and John couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't going to be pleasant. What exactly are we looking for? He asked, his voice breaking the silence. Alira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stopped, her head tilting slightly, as if listening for something. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that made John feel as though he were standing at the edge of a precipice, waiting for something to happen. Then, finally, she spoke. The echoes are here. I can feel them, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. John's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, you can feel them? Alira turned to face him, her expression serious. I've been tracking these echoes for a long time. They're not just random, John. They're connected, and they're leading us to something. Something important. John swallowed, trying to make sense of her words. And what happens when we find it? We stop it, she said simply, though the certainty in her voice was tempered by a hint of doubt. We stop whatever is causing these echoes, before they spread further. Alira turned and started walking again, more cautiously this time. John followed, his steps slow and deliberate as he tried to keep up with her. The forest around them seemed to close in, the trees growing denser as they moved deeper. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and turning in strange ways. John could feel a strange pull, as if the very ground beneath him was shifting. Every step felt heavier than the last. They walked for what seemed like hours, the forest growing darker with every passing minute. Then, suddenly, Alira stopped. She held up a hand, signaling for him to be silent. John strained his ears, trying to hear what had caught her attention, but all he could hear was the sound of his own breath and the distant rustle of leaves. "It's close," she murmured. "We need to be careful." They continued, more cautiously now, their every movement deliberate. John felt his pulse quicken. Whatever they were about to face, he knew it wasn't going to be easy. As they rounded a bend in the path, the trees parted to reveal a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large stone, covered in strange markings, its surface slick with moisture. Alira approached the stone slowly, her eyes narrowing as she studied it. John stayed back, his instincts telling him to be wary. The air around the stone felt charged, as if it were alive with energy. Alira reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the stone. The moment her skin made contact, a low hum filled the air, reverberating through the ground beneath their feet. John's heart pounded in his chest. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Alira didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes, concentrating. The humming grew louder, more intense, and for a brief moment, John thought he saw something moving just beneath the surface of the stone. A flicker of shadow, a ripple in the air. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the hum stopped. Alira opened her eyes, her expression grave. "This is it," she said softly. "This is where the echoes are coming from." The humming from the stone was gone, but the atmosphere in the clearing remained thick with an unsettling energy. John stood still, his breath shallow as he watched Alira's fingers hover over the surface of the stone, her expression unreadable. Something about the way the air vibrated, the tension that seemed to grow stronger the longer they stood there, sent a chill crawling up his spine. The stone was like a doorway to something hidden beneath its surface, and it felt like it was waiting for them. "What now?" John asked, unable to shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Alira slowly withdrew her hand from the stone, her eyes meeting his with a seriousness that made his heart race. "Now we open it," she said, her voice steady but with a trace of something darker. "This stone is a conduit, a focus for the echoes. Whatever is causing them is trapped inside." John blinked. "You mean the echoes are inside the stone?" Alira nodded, her gaze still fixed on the stone as if she could see something inside it that John couldn't. "Yes, they're not just random fragments of another world, John. They are tied to this stone, and when it activates, they come through, into our world." The weight of her words settled in John's chest like a lead balloon. He glanced at the stone again, noticing the strange symbols etched into its surface, glowing faintly in the dim light of the clearing. It was almost as if the markings were alive, shifting and pulsing as if they were trying to communicate. Alira stepped closer to the stone, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "We have to be careful," she murmured. "The echoes are dangerous. Once we open this, there's no turning back." John's pulse quickened. "What happens if we don't open it? If we just leave it alone?" Alira looked at him, her expression grave. "The echoes will continue to slip through, and they will grow stronger. Eventually, they'll break free completely. And when that happens, we won't be able to stop them." The urgency in her voice made it clear that time was running out. John took a deep breath, his mind racing. He didn't fully understand everything Alira had explained, but the weight of the situation was undeniable. The stone, the echoes, the strange force drawing them closer, it was all connected. And they had to stop it, whatever it was. "All right," John said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's open it." Alira nodded, taking a step back to give him room. "Place your hand on the stone. Together, we can unlock it." John hesitated for a moment, his fingers hovering just above the stone's surface. There was a part of him that wanted to pull away, to run back to the safety of the city, but he knew there was no escaping this. Not now. He placed his hand on the stone, and as soon as his skin made contact, a jolt of energy shot through him, and he gasped, his body vibrating with a strange force. The stone seemed to come alive beneath his palm, its symbols glowing brighter, and the hum that had been absent for so long now returned. Louder, deeper, as if the stone were waking up. Alira's voice was barely a whisper. "Stay focused, John. Keep your hand there." He felt a pressure building inside him. as though the stone were pulling something from within him, drawing it out into the air between them. The clearing grew colder, and John could see his breath forming in the air, sharp against the dark night. He felt something shift around him, something darker, colder, stretching across the forest. He wanted to pull his hand away, but Alira's hand landed on his, steadying him. "Don't. Let go," she said, her voice firm. And then, with a sudden surge of energy, the stone cracked open, splitting down the middle, and a blinding light poured out from the cracks. John could feel the force of it, overwhelming, pulling at him, dragging him toward the center of the stone. His heart pounded in his chest as the light expanded, flooding the clearing. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew they were about to face something far beyond their understanding. The light from the stone erupted with such intensity that it felt as though the world around them was being torn apart. John's eyes burned, and he instinctively squeezed them shut, but the light still pierced through his eyelids, filling every corner of his mind. His body felt weightless, as if the ground beneath him had disappeared, and he was floating in an endless sea of blinding brightness. He heard Alira's voice, faint and distant, though he could not make out the words. "Alira," he shouted, though his voice seemed swallowed by the overwhelming force of the light. It was like nothing he had ever experienced, raw, pure energy pulsing through his body, coursing through every fiber of his being. Then, as quickly as it had started, the light began to fade. The intense brightness softened, and John felt his feet touch the ground once more, his body still trembling from the strange energy that had surged through him. When he opened his eyes, the clearing was not as it had been. The trees were now distorted, their shapes twisted and warped, as though they were bending under the weight of something far beyond the natural world. The sky above had darkened, and the stars were no longer the tiny pinpricks of light they once were. Instead, they were enormous, swirling, like they were moving closer to the earth. John looked around in confusion, his heart still racing, but it was Alira's voice that broke through the chaos. "We've crossed over," she said, her tone grave. She was standing beside him, her eyes scanning the strange new world around them. "This is what happens when the echoes break through. This is where they come from." John swallowed hard, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. "What is this place? Where are we?" Alira's gaze turned toward him, her expression shadowed with a mixture of fear and determination. "We're in the space between worlds," she said quietly. "A place where the echoes are born, where they exist before they leak into our world." The trees, the sky, the very air around them seemed alive, shifting in ways that made John's head spin. The shadows twisted and moved, crawling along the ground like living creatures. Every breath he took felt heavier, as if the air itself was thick with something dangerous. "How do we get back?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Alira hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice low and uncertain. "I don't know. The echoes are powerful, and when they break through, they change everything. We're not just in another place. We're in another time, another reality." John's mind reeled. Time, reality, it all felt so fragile, so precarious. He didn't know how to make sense of it, how to fix it, but he knew one thing. They had to find a way out, and fast. Alira stepped forward, her eyes focused on something in the distance, something he couldn't yet see. "We need to find the source of the echoes," she said. "It's the only way to stop them from spreading." John nodded, though his stomach twisted with uncertainty. He didn't know what they were about to face, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. As they moved forward, the world around them seemed to grow darker, more twisted. The shadows seemed to reach out, brushing against him like hands, and the air was thick with a sense of danger. Every step they took felt like it was leading them deeper into a nightmare they couldn't escape. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far. The echoes were out, and the only way to stop them was to face whatever waited for them in this strange, distorted reality. The air around them seemed to thicken as they moved deeper into this strange world, each step feeling like it was pushing them further from everything familiar. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches reaching out like arms, the shadows growing long and sharp. The sky above had no clear horizon, just a swirl of dark clouds and shifting stars. It was as though time itself had lost its meaning in this place. Alira moved ahead, her steps confident, though John could see the tension in her shoulders. He felt like he was walking through a nightmare, the kind that creeps up on you slowly, making you wonder if you're still asleep. How are we supposed to find the source of the echoes in all of this? John asked, his voice almost drowned by the strange hum that filled the air. Alira turned to him, her eyes sharp. "We're not looking for one source," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "The echoes have spread, tangled with this reality. They're in everything here, and they're growing stronger." John's mind struggled to keep up with the complexity of her words. "But if they're everywhere, how do we stop them?" Alira paused, her eyes scanning the shifting forest around them. "We need to find the core of it, the center where it all began," she said. "Once we do that, we can stop the echoes from spreading further." John didn't respond immediately. He was trying to process it all, trying to figure out how they could possibly make sense of this nightmare world. The air felt thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to move with them, as if they were alive. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching them. "Do you think it's safe to keep going?" John asked after a while. Alira didn't hesitate. "There's no turning back now," she said, her tone grim. "We have to move forward if we want to stop this." They continued through the distorted forest, the darkness growing deeper with each step. John felt like they were being drawn into a place where the rules of reality didn't apply. The ground beneath their feet seemed uneven, as if it were shifting constantly, and the trees twisted in unnatural ways, their bark shimmering in the strange light. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center of it stood a massive, dark stone, much like the one they had encountered earlier, but this one was larger, its surface covered in intricate, glowing symbols. It pulsed with energy, the vibrations humming in the air, sending ripples through the ground. John could feel the energy coming off it, heavy and oppressive. "This is it," Alira said, her voice low. "The core of the echoes." She stepped forward, but John hesitated. Something about the stone didn't feel right. The air around it seemed charged, like something was just waiting to break free. "What do we do now?" John asked, his heart pounding. Alira turned to him, her face set with determination. "We have to activate it," she said. "Only then can we close the rift and stop the echoes from spreading any further." She stepped forward again, this time reaching out to place her hand on the surface of the stone. The moment her skin made contact, the ground trembled beneath them, and a low, guttural sound rose from deep within the stone. The symbols on its surface began to glow brighter, and a wave of energy radiated outwards, causing the air to crackle with intensity. John felt his skin prickle as if the very atmosphere was shifting, responding to the force building within the stone. The shadows around them grew darker, swirling in unnatural patterns, as if they were drawn to the power emanating from the stone. Alira gritted her teeth, her fingers digging into the stone's surface. "It's working," she said, though her voice was strained. "But it's not enough. We need to push through. We need to release the energy trapped inside." John watched as she focused, her body trembling with the effort. The stone continued to hum, the symbols pulsing in time with the vibrations. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the stone cracked open, and a blinding light erupted from its center. John shielded his eyes, his heart racing. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he knew one thing. The echoes were about to be unleashed, and they would face whatever came next, together. The light from the stone was overwhelming, pulsing with such intensity that it felt as though it was ripping through the very fabric of reality. John shielded his eyes, his heart racing as the ground beneath them trembled with the force of the eruption. The air was thick with energy, crackling like static electricity. The shadows around them stretched and twisted, contorting into shapes that were unnatural, their movements jerky and erratic. Alira stood firm, her hand still pressed against the stone as it cracked open further, releasing waves of light and dark energy that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "Alira, what's happening?" John shouted, his voice barely audible over the rising hum. She didn't answer, her focus completely on the stone. The symbols etched into its surface were now glowing brightly, flickering in rapid succession, each pulse releasing more energy into the air. John could feel the power building, suffocating him, the atmosphere growing thicker with each passing moment. The shadows grew even darker, swirling violently around them, as if they had a life of their own. He could hear a low, guttural sound rising from the depths of the stone, as though something ancient and powerful was awakening. John felt the weight of it pressing in on him, but he couldn't move. His feet felt rooted to the spot, as if the very ground had claimed him. "We have to stop it," he yelled, but Alira's face remained calm, almost detached. "It's too late to stop it now," she said, her voice strained but steady. "We have to release the energy. Only then can we seal the rift and stop the echoes from spreading." The words barely registered as John watched the stone break open completely. A blinding light poured out from within, filling the clearing and swallowing everything in its path. The shadows around them were torn apart, and for a brief moment, everything was still, perfectly still. Then, a deafening crack split the silence. The force of it sent John stumbling backward, his head spinning as the ground seemed to shake beneath him. He barely managed to catch himself before hitting the ground. Alira was still standing, her hand still pressed against the stone, but now she was glowing, her body radiating with an energy he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Alira, he started, but his words faltered as he saw her face. She wasn't just glowing, she was changing. Her form seemed to shimmer, her edges blurring, as if she were made of light itself. "What's happening to you?" John's voice cracked with fear. I'm stabilizing the rift," Alira said, her voice distant, almost like it was coming from somewhere far away. "This is the only way to prevent the echoes from destroying everything. But I won't be able to return." John's chest tightened. "No, we can't lose you, not now." But Alira only smiled faintly, the light around her flickering. "It's the only way," she whispered, before her body began to dissolve into pure energy, the light enveloping her completely. John reached out, but it was too late. Alira was gone, her form fading into the air, leaving behind only a faint, shimmering trace of her presence. The stone was silent now, no longer pulsing with energy. The rift had closed, but the world around them was still distorted, the sky still swirling with dark, ominous clouds. The shadows had calmed, but the atmosphere was heavy with the knowledge that the echoes were not entirely gone. They had been contained, for now, but John knew it wouldn't last forever. He stood there, alone in the clearing, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. Alira was gone, but her sacrifice had sealed the rift, at least for the moment. The question now was what came next. The echoes had been stopped, but what would be left in the aftermath? And would they ever truly be free from the strange forces that had begun to bleed into their world? John didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. Things would never be the same again.